Hey everyone, my name is Matt, and welcome back. If you've already gone through the first part of the series, make sure you get your file loaded up. If not, make sure you check out the video up above because that is going to get you to the part that we're at currently. We're going to go ahead and work on the battery again today, but we're going to degrade it. We're going to rough it up and make it look old and rusted and just kind of destroyed. So it's going to be really important that you're already to the area where we are in this tutorial series because the only thing that I'm providing in this tutorial series is the battery model. With that said, if you're new here, make sure you hit the like button and the subscribe button. It does help the channel grow and it helps me continue doing what I do here for free. And if you feel like you want to take that support a little bit further, you can join me on Patreon or you can join me as a member on YouTube or Twitch. On both Patreon and YouTube, you get access to exclusive videos as well as exclusive downloads and other pieces of content that I may post for my members. You can find a link for that down in the description. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started on this because we have quite a bit of work to do. So welcome back. So if you remember correctly, this is right where we left off. We have our nice looking battery. So we're going to do a couple of things today before we get started because I want to make sure that this looks as clean as possible for me so I can figure out exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so again, this is kind of the image that I'm using for the kind of reference for this battery as far as like the degrading goes and the damage. So that's what I'm going to be working off of here. But we have our battery now. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So right now, one of the things that I'm having a hard time with is like the scene itself just feels kind of flat and not super realistic. It's because we're kind of missing a little bit of detail. So we're going to do a couple of things. One of the things that I like to do when I'm working inside a substance is to change the viewport up a little bit. So the first thing is I'm going to change my specular quality up to high. You may have a little bit of an issue with this because it is going to use your machine a little bit heavier. So use whatever you can. If you have to use the default, it's totally understandable. It's not a big deal. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my display. I like to turn the environment opacity up a little bit because I feel like that gives me a little bit of a better indication on like what it is I'm actually looking at. And it kind of helps me feel like it's actually existing in a scene. So the next thing we'll do, we're going to go down, we're going to turn on shadows. Shadows give you just a little bit more of a realistic lighting. Again, these features that I'm turning on may run your machine a little bit harder depending on what GPU you have. So be careful if you start to notice that things are running a little bad. Turn some of these off. This is just kind of my way of making sure that I'm getting the best possible result out of Substance Painter before I take it into Maya for rendering. And that's about it. So I'm going to leave that like that. You can see already our battery looks a lot better. We can kind of tell what's going on now. It just feels a little bit nicer now. So the next thing we want to do is we want to start adding a little bit of height information because currently the battery doesn't have any. So what do I mean by that? If you look at a battery, the bottom of the battery has an indentation. So we want to kind of mimic that. So what I can do is I can go to my white stripe up here and I know for a fact that this is a path, right? So I can actually grab this path and I can copy it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here. And since this is below all of the label and everything like this, I need this below it. So we'll create a fill layer. We're going to add a black mask, and then I'm going to paste that path in there. So I've got my path again. So again, we can select our entire path. We can move it down. And you'll notice nothing's really changing. It's because we haven't really set up this material yet. So we're going to put that right there. So we're going to go back to our material settings here. I'm going to go down. We're going to turn off color because we're not using it. We're going to turn on height. Scroll down, we're going to go in the negative. So you can see how that gives us that divot. And then we're going to go back to our path. We're going to adjust this a little bit. So I want it to be a tad bit bigger. And I don't want it to be as sharp as that because it's a little bit more of a kind of like gradient. It's like the label's kind of wrapped over it. So we don't want this sharpness. So I'm going to go ahead and add a blur to this. And you can see now how we have that nice kind of clean, almost bevel. And we can adjust that however we want to. So I think I'll probably go right about there. That should work. Okay, so that's going to give us a little bit more of a realistic look on that aspect. And then I think what I want to do is I also want to take both of these and give them a little bit of positive height. So I'm going to rename this layer negative height. And then I'm going to go up to these white stripes. So what I want to do for these is I just want to add a little bit of height. So I'm going to click height. We're going to just add some height. Not a whole lot. Just a little bit. You can see how we can kind of get a little bit more extreme there, and I don't want to go that far, so I'm really just going to add a little bit. Same up here. And that'll just give us a little bit different of a feel. So you can see that adds just a little bit of kind of niceness to it. Okay, so overall that's starting to feel really good. One of the things I want to do is the battery wrapping itself is kind of, it's plastic. It's a plastic that's been wrapped around it. So a lot of the time on older batteries, that's going to get kind of shriveled. It's going to break. It's going to tear. It's going to do some weird things. So we're going to add some distortion to this. At this point, if you want to save your battery as just like a clean battery, go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do save because this is my pre-aging battery. This is done. The scene is kind of ready to go for the aging process. And then I'm going to go File, Save As. We're going to do post-aging and hit save. We are ready to start kind of tearing this battery apart. So what I want to do is the first thing I want to focus on is the label. I want to make the label kind of like grungy and nasty. So I know that what I want to do is I want to create a fill layer. This fill layer is going to be only a height layer, and we need to choose what height we want to use. So I'm going to try to play with a couple of these noises and see which gives me the result that I'm kind of looking for. And actually, that's kind of great. I like that a lot. So the only issue I have here is I need that on just the wrapper again. So I'm going to go do a black mask, and then we're going to come down here to the label base because I know that's my base kind of mask. And I can copy my mask, and I can go right up in here to my fill layer and paste mask. Now we can see we're getting that just on the wrapper. Okay, cool. So this is how we're going to start kind of eroding this. So I want to play with this a little bit because right now this is too extreme and I don't like the way it looks yet. I like the actual texture that I'm getting, but I don't like the way it looks. So I want it pretty heavy, but I also want to scale it. Okay, and that's pretty good right there, but you know, again, I've lost kind of control over this. So we're going to click on the material itself. We're going to go and add a level, and we're going to change this to height. This is where we're going to adjust our actual height, kind of like density, that what's happening. So let's go ahead and just kind of, I'm going to just add that sort of like crumbling, warping. Pretty subtle. You know, the label's starting to kind of bubble and just degrade a bit, so cool. All right, that's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and move this above that. And we're going to create a new folder. This is going to be our damage. All right, so that's our warping layer. So the next thing is I want to start to kind of erase chunks of this battery, right? Like I want pieces of the label torn and like gone. So the best way to do that is going to be to kind of remove and degrade the layers that we've kind of created so far. So here's what we can do. We can go down here. So I know for a fact that my copper label right here is kind of set up. We're going to go to our brushes, and we're going to choose one that's a little bit sharper. So I think I'm going to try this dark hatch. Maybe. Let's use this charcoal. I think this charcoal will be good. I'm going to hit X to swap to black because we're going to remove some of the wrapper here. So this is a little bit of an issue, right? So if I'm painting here, nothing's really like happening. So like I want this to basically look like part of the battery's torn away. And so the issue is that both of these labels are now kind of combined. So the problem is that I would have to do this across both layers. So what I'm going to do, we're going to actually take our base and we're going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to move it right above everything else. So that gives us that kind of metallic base. So now from here, what I want to do is, because this base is its own thing, I can actually add a black mask to it. And so from here, as long as I'm using white, I can now kind of paint this information in. So we can see how I can start kind of tearing up the label. Just do like a nice chunk ripped out of it, and that starts to kind of eat away at this, and I can do this wherever I want to as long as this layer is above everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it right up here, so just wherever I want to touch it and kind of like break it apart, I can do that now no matter what. Let's move it up 2 more. All right, so now this needs to have its own sort of height. This needs to be able to kind of damage this. So what I'm going to do is go into my fill layer here. I'm going to add a height, and you can see now how we can just kind of drag that in and degrade that a little bit. Now, one of the issues I'm having here is I'm getting this kind of like grainy kind of distortion, and I don't necessarily want that. So let's see what we can do about that. So we're going to go up to the mask. We're going to add a filter. We're going to add a blur. That should kind of blur it just a little bit, and I just want to kind of have a little bit less of that. It's okay to have a little bit because like we're assuming that dirt and grime is going to build up there anyway. I just didn't want so much of it. Okay, so from here we can start just kind of actually going to town and creatively like destroying this wrapper. So I'm just gonna go through here and just tear a little bit up. Just be careful because this is over everything, so we want to make sure that we're not damaging the actual battery portion itself. And then I know kind of down here I want to tear this up a bit, kind of along the seam. And we're going to work on fixing that in a second as well. So what we can do is we can go here to height. We're going to change it from linear dodge to normal. And you can see how that's going to start tearing that apart now. Okay. So we just want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that this stays as like realistic as possible. And this is where we're going to kind of utilize our natural seam. So our object has a natural seam going down the middle. And a lot of times when you look at like broken, destroyed batteries, the seam kind of like breaks open a little bit and starts to leak out. So we're gonna work on doing some stuff like that. Kind of the same thing down here. This one's tough though, because I don't necessarily want this to remove that. So this one I'm gonna have to make a separate layer to kind of retain that height, because I don't want to lose that height. So anything down here we can technically do, but I'm gonna reserve that to another layer. And so we'll notice that as we're painting and doing this stuff, that it's retaining the text. That means that we just need to move our layer up one more. And now the text is gone. So just make sure that didn't change. There we go. Okay. That was like a weird glitch. All right, so we're gonna just kind of keep tearing this apart. I'm gonna do like a large tear over here. So we'll just haphazardly just kind of rip this apart. I'm just gonna kind of keep working at this a little bit. And again, I don't want to lose that detail. So that detail is kind of important to me. So what I can do is I can take this. So we're going to do base. I'm going to duplicate this. And then instead of normal, I'm going to go back to linear dodge. And then from here, I should be able to now retain that information. So you can see how that's staying behind now. So that's how I want to just kind of retain that area. I don't care about the rest of it necessarily. And you can see as we erase, we still lose that actual label. And that's what we want to kind of keep. All right, so looking at it now, we already have a pretty good like torn up battery. The label's kind of degraded a little bit. Things are kind of looking terrible. So let's start adding some stuff that happens to these as they degrade like this. So we're gonna start adding a little bit of dirt detailing. Now there's sort of two ways that you can do this. You can do this procedurally or you can do it manually. I tend to like to paint manually, but procedurally works as well. So let's take a look at how we want to do this kind of procedurally. So what we can do is we can select this one. We're gonna go to the mask on the, let's see, base damage. 2 LD. Just so I know that's linear dodge. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some procedural kind of damage or dirt to the height information that we just created. So we need to add a generator to it. So we're going to do dirt cavities. So once we've added dirt cavities, you can see we didn't really get anything that changed. It's okay. We're going to start doing some stuff now. All right, so this base damage, we're going to go in here. Oh. So we're going to go to base damage and we're going to right click, add an anchor point. This anchor point is going to be what we use to reference this. So let's go to our fill layer here. We're going to change the color. I'm going to do like green just to show you like what this is doing. So you can see that's kind of affecting our edge wear now. So we'll go into the generator. We're going to scroll to the mask builder all the way down to micro height. We're going to click this. We're going to go to our anchor point and we're going to hit anchor. You see now our edge wear is following along our height map. So we need to just change that just a tad bit though. We're gonna go to micro details. And we're gonna just change the intensity on that because it's a little too intense for me. Let's see, let's do a little bit. Let's reduce the radius a tad bit. Okay. So just looking at that, we can see that we're starting to get some of this like dirt look build up, which is nice. It's awesome. So let's go ahead and use this to our advantage. And we're going to go ahead and turn this down and we're going to change that color to more of a dirt. And now we can actually kind of play with what we're doing. So I'm going to go back to the mask editor. And this comes with a sharpen. I think I'm actually going to disable the sharpen, because it's just adding a little bit too much sharpness for me. So let's go here. We can turn our intensity up a little bit. And I'm just going through here and tweaking a couple of these settings. And you can see that we can change kind of like what we're doing here. With the curvature type, I'm just going to stick with Sobel because it's giving me the best result. I'm just trying to find a good balance between what I actually want. Okay, so you can see that gives us a little bit of kind of different coloration around the label, so we're starting to build up a little bit of that dirt. The next thing I want to do is just start doing a little bit of manual painting as well. So what I want to come in here with, so I'm going to actually, let's see, we're going to call this dust layer. I'm going to actually duplicate this. And then I'm going to remove the masks and just clear the mask. And then what we want to do is we want this underneath that dust layer. So I'm going to go ahead and put it there. So we're going to do dirt. And this should be beneath everything. So I can tell right now that if I come in here, I just change this coloration a little bit, just make it a little bit darker. So what I'll do is I'm going to go to my paintbrush, and this is where I like to do a little bit of custom painting. I'm going to actually turn my flow down up here, and then I'm going to go through and just add a little bit of like inner dirt to this, and this is going to further kind of just break up the separation between the label and the battery itself. So we can see if we zoom away. I don't really like how orange that is, so I'm going to darken it up a little bit. That's better. Okay, so we'll go back to painting. And we just really want to kind of remove any of the shininess that we're getting here. And this gets you comfortable with the idea that, like, you know, you're going to go in and manually kind of adjust these things. So sometimes I don't recommend completely going procedural all the time because it kind of takes away from the fact that you can actually get really creative with the way that kind of dirt and texture builds up. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of do this. And again, you know, if you want to do this procedurally and you want to kind of work through that whole workflow, you absolutely can. But I would recommend spending some time understanding like how material builds up over time, how texture and degradation builds up over time, because it's actually super important to kind of understand those topics. Otherwise, you're just going to end up slapping a bunch of maps on things, and it's not going to look the way that you want it to, and it's not going to kind of come across as like realistic. Okay, so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to finish up this, and I'm going to come back and show you what it looks like. Okay, so that's done. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with kind of my thought process while I was doing this. I like to just kind of roughly paint across. One of the things that happens when I'm doing this is I start to kind of look at what I'm doing and like what's going on in the model. And so one of the issues that I found here is that this dirt, this dust, it's too yellow. So I kind of like doing the manual painting because eventually I start looking at it and I can later decide like, no, that doesn't look right, you know? So let's go ahead and kind of adjust that. We're going to just kind of pull out some of that yellow. And just kind of play with this a little bit. There we go. That way we have a little bit of a different look there. Okay, cool. So you can see now how we've got this really nice detail building up, but there's an issue. We didn't kind of do the bottom down here, so we need to kind of duplicate this. So this layer itself needs to be duplicated. So we're going to duplicate that. And then we have the same kind of configuration here. The issue is that we're following a totally different height map. So we're going to go to our base damage 2. We're going to create an anchor point. We're going to just kind of reinforce this thing that we did, and then we're going to go down here. We're going to change our anchor point to the linear dodge mask. That's going to give us that additional kind of material, and we just want to make sure we do that. That way we have unique, or that way we have the same coverage across the battery and we're still preserving some of those details that we textured in. All right, so now let's talk about kind of overall damage, because we could sit here hand painting all day, every single day, and you know, we'd get places, but it would take a while. So what I want to do is I'm going to come up here, and this again all falls under the damage folder, which it needs to be. Let's move all of this into the damage folder. Make sure nothing changes there. Okay, cool. So I want to add an overall kind of dirt or dust. So we're going to use a generator here again. And I'm going to do this above damage just because I want to do this outside of it. So we're going to go over to our generators. And there's this dirt leak dry that I really like. So I'm going to put this right over damage. And you can see, boom, right there, that gives us a ton of detail. I really like the look of that. To the point where I'm not going to change it all that much. Actually, this kind of like white speckled dirt is really nice for kind of giving that. I just want to take it back just a tad bit. So we're going to come to our color, and we're just going to pull this back ever so slightly just to kind of darken it. There we go. That way it's not so in your face. It's there. But yeah, it looks great. So we're going to call this overall filth. All right. So our overall filth is going to get moved into here. We want that there. The next thing we want to do is add a little bit of rust and damage. So, you know, obviously with the label torn off of this, if it's been sitting outside, it's going to rust. It's going to degrade. It's going to look really gnarly. So these cuts and these chunks, we're going to start adding in some rust. So what I'm going to do is underneath my overall filth layer, I'm going to add a new fill layer. Actually, no, hold on. Underneath my fill layer, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go down, and I'm going to locate metal rust. If you do not have this, you can find it on the Substance Community Marketplace. That's where I got it from. But we'll just take this. We're going to drag it right above the dust. And you can see that gives us a really good start. Honestly, that looks pretty great. The only issue is, of course, it's, you know, covering everything. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to go add a black filter or a black mask. And then we're going to use this to kind of add in to this area. So same kind of concept. I'm going to go down to my base damage. And I'm going to copy this mask. And then I'm going to go up here to the metal rust. And I'm going to paste this mask. So you can see now that gives us rust right where we were working, and it kind of damages it really well. Let's see. And now that we've added another color to this, you can see once again, this kind of external line, I'm not liking it. I'm not a huge fan of it. So I want to just continue sort of tweaking this. Maybe going a little bit tan, or even kind of gray. Honestly, what I think I'll do is I'm just going to turn it down a little bit. Oh, hold on. I'm going to go up here to base color, and I'm going to just turn it down a bit. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm replicating that across. So we'll go in here. I'm going to just go ahead and add this as a swatch. And I'm going to change this to that swatch. And then we're going to just kind of pull down the transparency on these a little bit. Let's see. I'm feeling that a little bit more. That way it doesn't feel as, like, terrible. Okay, so I want to go ahead and tweak this and get this looking the way I want it to before I go ahead and replicate it down at the bottom. So we're going to go to the material itself, and I'm going to lighten it up a bit. I don't like currently how dark it is. I want to kind of dry it out too, because like rust, when it gets wet, it's very dark. It's very kind of like almost like orange peel color. So we want this battery to be super dry and not have a lot of like moisture to it. It's been sitting outside for a long time. So we're going to dry this rust out a bit. Go, that's pretty good. And I actually really like the way that looks. The only issue that I'm having is I don't necessarily like the fact that I can't see any of the battery left. So we're going to kind of work some of that in there. Okay, so what we can do now is we're going to duplicate this. So if we go into our mask area, we can see that we copied over the anchor point. I'm going to get rid of that because I don't need it. But I am going to duplicate this entire layer now. So duplicate layer. And then we're going to go down to the mask that is handling the below damage. I'm going to copy this mask. And you can also do this workflow with anchor points if you wanted to. It's just totally kind of up to preference. Paste into mask. Okay, cool. And you can see, once again, we're still retaining that warp. That's what we want to make sure that we're retaining, because that's an important detail. Okay. So now, again, I'm going to kind of come in here and look at this. And so I'm already kind of like not hyper in love with the amount of height that's going on here, but I also want to just expose a little bit more of the silver. And so if I go in here and try to remove it, it's kind of covering the top. So we want to make sure that we kind of merge this, because we're only kind of pulling the color info. So we're going to take these two. We can kind of create our own little smart material almost. So I'm going to click this. Click this. We're going to create a folder. Oh. I'm going to call this Rust. And we can close that up. So now what I can do is I can actually add a white mask. White masks are super cool because now we can actually paint away that information while still kind of maintaining everything. So if I come in here and I paint, I can bring back that information now on both of these layers. So you can see now how, because we put them in a folder and now we're controlling kind of the base of that folder instead of the materials themselves, we can kind of bring some of that material back. And this way we can kind of come in here and just restore a little bit of the information. And I like to kind of come in here and just trace where my map is. So like I know this is kind of the edge of the battery, right? So we want to kind of include that information in there. Maybe a little bit of surviving edge wear there. And we can just kind of go to town with this and just add detail wherever we want to and kind of bring back a little bit of the battery and a little less of the rust. Maybe this one's a little bit less affected. This area didn't rust nearly as bad. It's just dirty. We can kind of texture that and bring that back. And this just also kind of helps break it up a little bit. The last thing you want to do is have like super dense areas where like the texture doesn't change, because it doesn't give you a lot of breakup. It doesn't give you a lot of like detail. And so we want to kind of try to break this up as much as possible. And we can come back later and just degrade this a little bit further and darken the metal up a bit. But initially what we're doing is just removing some of the rust and kind of bringing back some of this material. And, you know, this is totally dependent on how you want to do this. But we can just kind of start adding in a little bit of that detail and kind of bringing it back into place. So obviously that part of the battery is exposed and rusted and kind of trashed. What about the top? What about the bottom? We haven't touched those yet. So we can now, in our rust, just go in here and go into our first layer, right? And you can see that if we go to white, we can just add that rust back in. So we can start rusting the top of this. And just really kind of driving that detail home. So we have a little bit of an issue here. You can see that our mask, our dust is actually kind of getting in the way of this. So we're gonna have to kind of bring that back in a little bit, but that's okay. We'll focus on that in a second here. And that's happening because the overall filth is actually kind of overriding it. So I think what I'm going to do is just move that up above it. Yeah. And so I just realized that I've been painting this with my flow at low. Make sure you turn your flow back up. That way you can get that detail back in there. And we're just kind of haphazardly doing this because I want a little bit of information in there to stay. I want a little bit of that metal to pop through. And it actually kind of helped that I did that, because now I get like 2 different tones of rust, and I wasn't even trying to do that. Okay. All right. Sweet. So that looks pretty solid. I'm pretty happy with that. So the next thing is to add some of that battery leakage that we get, that white, crusty, kind of awful stuff. So we can go ahead and build a material that allows us to do that, and it can be kind of retained to its own area. So let's start looking at how we can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and save because it's been a minute. In damage, I'm going to create a new folder. This is going to be leakage. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a white layer. So we're going to go and add a fill layer in here. And this is going to be our kind of our battery leakage sort of thing. So this is going to be like the first base layer of it. So let's go ahead and add a black mask. And then I'm going to just go to my paintbrush, and we're going to look for dirt 1. And so from here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to just paint a section. This is going to be kind of where we start to build this. And so this is my leakage, right? Like this is where it's going to start kind of leaking from. I hate that. Let's fix that. Okay. So first layer we're going to start looking at is this one, of course. We're going to go to height. We're going to go just make that as kind of, this stuff's pretty like gnarly. So it's a pretty thick sort of like stuff. The other thing I want to do is I want to change how this is working. So in the leakage, I'm going to add a black mask to the top, and I'm going to take this information. I'm going to actually copy this mask, and I'm going to put it up here, paste it in the mask. So you can see that does the same thing. We're actually going to clear this mask. We're going to just delete the mask, because what we want to do is we want to use that base folder as our painting mechanism, but we want to add some detail deep inside this. So I want to add another fill layer in here. This fill layer is going to be the blue sort of kind of like hyper pigmented like stuff that you get. And so this needs to be broken up though. So this needs to have some sort of like control over it. So we want that nice kind of like teal battery distortion. We're going to go ahead and add a white mask. And then to this white mask, we're going to add a fill layer. This is going to degrade the color a little bit, so we're going to have to kind of pull it back. So we want that. And then from here in this fill layer, we're going to change this grayscale to black and white spots. And you can see how that breaks that up now and gives us that kind of detail. So we just want to kind of play with the contrast here now and bring some of that back in. So there we go. So that's pretty nice. So this is going to give us kind of that battery corrosion. So now with that material set up, we can actually go up here, and you can see when we paint, it starts adding it in. So I can heavily paint down here, and it starts to add that. The issue is, though, is we're pulling all of our old information, so we're losing a lot of our details. So we need to go up here. We've got to change the height on this to normal. That's going to start pulling that data back through. Okay, so now that that's all kind of configured, we can actually go up here, turn our grayscale all the way up, and we can start painting all that information in. So we're probably going to use this dirt spots one. I like the look that this gives me. I'm going to just degrade that and just kind of add that leakage. So we'll just kind of throw a little bit here just to show like this is where it's coming from, right? Like this is where it's been leaking. But we're also going to kind of continue this. So I'm going to make that really small and just kind of like paint that in a little bit. Like this is where it kind of broke, like the seal of the battery broke. And then a little bit up here. So wherever there would be kind of like a seam to be considered, we'll just kind of paint some of this stuff in here. All right, cool. So let's just kind of take a look at that. That's been leaking from there. And so now we can just kind of continue that a little bit. We can turn our flow down. We can add a little bit of like just kind of degradation around these areas, so to speak. So you get some of that rust coming through, you get a lot of that information, and then maybe we want to do another like heavy leak over here. So right under here where this is, we'll turn our flow up a little bit. We'll just build up some grime, and then just kind of control the way this is leaking here. Whoop. You don't want to do too heavy because then you start to lose some of your height detail, but you can see that we can just kind of build this up a little bit and degrade that. And we can actually kind of go into this layer and just make that a little bit more extreme, a little bit less extreme. The other thing is we need some roughness on there, so let's turn the roughness up. So we don't want that to be shiny. It needs to be pretty opaque. Okay. So we'll go right back to painting. Just kind of adding a little bit more damage to this. And you know, again, we can just kind of use this as like a really light kind of detail brush and just kind of paint some of this detail in, break that rust up a bit. So we don't need the heavy battery leakage, but we want a little bit of it. Over here's one though that I'd like to have a lot here because this is where the seam broke, right? So obviously the battery's gonna leak pretty heavily from here. So we wanna make sure that we're getting a lot of information in here. So right along that seam where we can see the break, we'll have a little bit of a leak. You know, that'll leak onto the text and everything like that. So depending on what direction it was leaking. But we just want to have that kind of breaking out a bit. And we'll just kind of continue going around and adding a little bit of damage, a little bit of detail. Some more areas where it's like heavily busted through. The whole goal here is just to establish like we're not working with like the same material over and over again, so we're actually breaking it up pretty heavily and just trying to add some information in there and add some detail in there. Okay. All right. So you can see now how we've added a lot of detail with just a little bit of work, a little bit of like degradation and damage. So the last thing I want to do now is just kind of add an additional kind of dirt pass on this. And so this is going to be kind of like a darker pass. So right over leakage, or actually we're going to do this kind of underneath everything. So under dirt, I'm going to do a new layer. We're going to go ahead and do a black mask. This layer itself is going to be just a really kind of dark brown almost. And then we're going to go to our brush. And I'm going to look for Fibers Soft. I like the Fibers Soft brush because it just kind of lets me do some really nice intricate detailing. And so we're going to just kind of darken the battery up a little bit. We're going to just kind of add a little bit, oop, that's a little too much. A little bit of an extra kind of layer of just gnarliness. And you can see all we're doing here is just building and building and building. And this allows us to kind of really age this thing and make it look terrible, which is good. That's what we want. We want it to look like crap because it's been sitting outside, it's been rusting, it's degraded. There isn't a lot of shine left in it anymore. And so there we kind of have it. I'm going to come down here and add a little bit extra just because I feel like this area needs it the most. And you can see how just adding like a little base layer above it really kind of helps just sell the tarnish. And we forgot about the bottom, so let's not forget about that. So we're going to go back up to our rust, come in here with just a little bit of a lighter flow. Just kind of add some rust. It's a little hard to tell what we're doing just because of the lighting. You can kind of fix that by turning off shadows. So you can kind of see what we're doing here. So we're just going to degrade this a little bit, make sure we just cover the whole battery. And then right in here is where I'm going to add that kind of gnarly degradation that we got, the actual kind of leakage. So we're going to come in here, I'm going to turn the flow pretty high, and then we're going to just add some leakage in here. Okay. And then we'll come right back through with that dirt. and just kind of paint over a little bit. Just kind of darken up the bottom a little bit. Okay, sweet. All right. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the texturing portion of this. I know this was probably a much longer video for you, but what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and export our materials, our textures from Substance Painter. So if you haven't done this yet, this is kind of the final step, right? We're going to take these textures outside of Substance Painter, toss them into Maya, Blender, whatever. So the last thing we're going to do is export everything. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. All right, I'm going to go to File. We're going to go to Export Textures. And then in here, we're going to stick with all of the kind of standard stuff that we've been doing. You can change your resolution here. I personally am going to export in 8K just because I want to squeeze every last little bit of detail out of here, but 4K works fine too. But this battery ID is going to output every single material that we need. So we need to change the folder. So I'm going to just put this on my desktop for now. New folder, battery, select folder. 8 bits is fine, dilation infinite. We're all good to go there, and hit export. It's going to run through and export those materials that we just created, and that's it. So we can close that. We'll validate that our textures were actually exported. So if I go into my folder here, we can see now that we have a lovely battery texture. Now you can take that into whatever your program of choice is, assign it, and start building out your material networks. We're not going to cover that in this series because that is a separate topic and that is a separate thing. But if you are on my Patreon or you're on my YouTube, I'm going to do a whole breakdown on how I set this up in Maya and how I render this out, and give you guys a little bit more information on how I actually built the final scene that you'll likely see on my Instagram. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to join me as a member on YouTube or a member on Patreon, because that will be a member exclusive video. All right, I hope you enjoyed this series. I know it took a long time to get to part 3 of it, but part 3 is here. Part 1, 2, and 3 are done. I hope you feel like you're more comfortable with Substance Painter now, because it can be a little bit of a daunting program to jump into. But once you kind of work with it and play with it, you start to build on those skills. You'll find that it's an amazing application and it's really fun to work with and texture things in. So thank you so much for watching this series. If you guys have questions or anything like that, please feel free to leave them down in the comments as always. And keep a lookout for the future Advanced Substance Painter series, where I'll be going over a more advanced project and we'll be working on something that's a little bit more difficult and a little bit more kind of intensive. As always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon, YouTube, and Twitch. You guys, without you, I wouldn't be doing this stuff, so thank you so much for continuing to help the channel grow, and I will see you all in the next video.